Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of the Beast of Manchester, also known as Britain's forgotten serial killer. Interesting. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! I can't tell you how glad I am to be back. I was on holiday last week, for those of you that didn't know, and so I missed an upload and it was horrific and I hated it, so I'm going to try and not do that ever again. Reason that I missed the upload and didn't double up is because I have been focusing my attention on learning to drive, and guess what I did today? Take a ringing guess. My driving test, and guess what happened? I only went and passed. That deserves a gin, look how big it is. It's a big gin, it's a big gin, gonna drink it all. Ooh, it was really horrible. Really horrible. And I never have to do it again. Yes. Anyhow, I missed you. I love you. Let's start today's story and get back to what we do best. Have a chat about true crime. Here we go. Today's case is an interesting one. Britain's forgotten serial killer. How does that happen, you ask? Well, if you happen to be beginning your serial killer spree at around the same time as somebody far more, I can't say good at it. What do I mean? Notorious? Somebody else. That somebody else was Peter Sutcliffe. Yeah. And his victims were falling thick and fast, and they couldn't solve the case at the time that Trevor Hardy decided that he was going to get himself busy with his own killing spree. Terrible timing, Trevor. Trevor became completely overshadowed by the ongoing murderous rampage of Peter Sutcliffe. So he did slip under the radar in terms of media and the press and, you know, all of the things that usually go along with being a serial killer. Trevor Hardy, and it is hard to believe when you hear the story of Trevor Hardy, it's hard to believe that he was overshadowed by anyone or anything, because he is a piece of work. Trevor was born on the 11th of June in 1945. In Manchester. He was one of 4 siblings. He was from a working class family, and it was said that his father was incredibly strict. Not that it did any freaking good for Trevor. He was a naughty isn't even the word. Terror, like literally terror, like a terror. He was awful at school. He was incredibly unkind. He was a very, very big bully. And his behaviour at home was no better. He was just off the chart. His mother had no idea what to do with him. I read that his father was really strict, but it doesn't sound like anything that his father did worked or made any sort of, possibly made it worse. People were scared of Trevor. His family was scared of him, his siblings, his mum, possibly even his dad. He seemed, from what I could read, just incredibly uncontrollable. And that is frightening, isn't it? When somebody is so unpredictable and uncontrollable, that's a bad combo. He was incredibly violent as well. So this mixture, this hot pot of anger and violence and uncontrollable behaviour, it was awful. His behaviour was so bad that he spent a lot of his childhood in child detention centres. So he was really naughty. He'd do terrible things and then get put into a child detention centre, and then he would come home for a bit and then he'd go back for a bit. When he was home, the people in his local area would have their doors locked at night. So he was very bad. He would go and steal things, break into people's houses. He was just awful. When he was 15 years old, he was arrested for 20 burglaries. What the hell? I mean, I don't even know what to say about this behaviour. It's awful. What do you do about that as well? Like, I don't even know. I don't know. Whatever they did not work, by the way. At 15, when he was sentenced for the 20 burglaries, he was actually sent to an adult prison, and that is pretty much unheard of. He was sent to an adult prison, maybe to sort of shock it out of him. Maybe they thought, like, what we're doing is not happening, so let's see how he likes it in prison. Like, we, you know, scare him so that he doesn't want to go there when he gets older. I'm making that up, but that might have been the reason. Sadly, on his release from prison, so he must have been 16 or 17, he began drinking. Adding alcohol into this does not seem like it's going to go well, and it definitely does not. Alcohol on top of an already very violent person just made the violence much worse, and it made him more volatile as well. So this wasn't looking good. It gets worse. So he was banned from nearly every pub in the local area, because he just brought his reign of violence and terror along wherever he went. So lots of the local pubs were like, no, you're banned. You're barred for life. You're barred. I got to say that once. It was so fun. And he was such a douche. In any pubs where he wasn't barred, they would just empty on his arrival, because he was just really feared. He was just, people didn't want to be around him. They didn't want to know. But he liked that. He liked the fear that he evoked in other people. When he was released from prison, started heavy drinking, he also at this time decided that he was going to carry a knife. Okay. So on one occasion, he used this knife when he was in an argument with another man. I don't know who the other man was, but he used the knife and he stabbed the man in the leg, and it narrowly avoided the major artery in his leg. So he could have killed this guy. Luckily he didn't. It missed it. But that is a really close call, isn't it? And just, oh my gosh, like, you are such a volatile, angry human. Do not pick up a knife. You know, he must not have had that sort of self-aware. I mean, why am I trying to talk about his behaviour? He's a nut job. Later on, many psychiatrists would look into Trevor's case, into his story, his history, to try and find out what may have caused his behaviour, because it was extreme. And he had 3 other siblings, and it wasn't the case that they were behaving in this way as well. So he was an anomaly in the family, which must have been really difficult as one of his siblings. His younger brother Colin said that it did massively disrupt their family and their friendships and things like that. So that's just horrible as well, isn't it? One of the main contributing factors into Trevor's behaviour was a brain injury. So as a young child, and this I think is quite common in lots of serial killers actually, I digress. So he had this brain injury as a child. He banged his head in some fashion, and a slither of the skull sort of embedded into his brain. So, well, that's just brain damage, isn't it? So they think that has something to do with his terribly aggressive, violent behaviour. His mother would go on to say that he changed after his head injury as well. But, excuse me, it's been a long day. What? Oh. Pinky's out to play. Hold on to your hats, guys, okay? Because we get spicy early in this story. Okay, spicy. 1972. Trevor is at the pub with a friend called Stanley O'Brien. They are drinking, talk, chat, and then they start to have a row. They were arguing about whose turn it was to buy the next round of drinks, and each of them thought it was the other person. So it's not me. No, it's your turn. No, it's your turn. No, it's your turn. Arguing. Big argument. A big argument, but, you know, nothing to, like, get super crazy about, you would imagine. Trevor leaves the pub. He goes out. Fine. It got a bit heated. He's out of there. Trevor goes off and he returns to the pub with a freaking pickaxe. A pickaxe. And now he doesn't just threaten Stanley, Frog, sorry. He doesn't just say like, oh, and like give it the big un and threaten his friend. He smashes Stanley over the head with the pickaxe repeatedly. Can you imagine being in that pub with that going on? What? I mean, if that is not attempted murder, I don't know. And this is how he behaves with his friend. I can't even. Trevor wasn't a very big man, so he wasn't physically threatening looking, I suppose, is what I mean. Is that English? Again, I'm sorry. He wasn't a big sort of gruff, scary looking bloke. And I think that because he wasn't huge, that is why he didn't actually kill Stanley, because Stanley miraculously survived this ordeal, weirdly. This incident only went on to just instill even more fear into the local community, because that's crazy. That is what lengths he went to there. Do you know what I mean? I mean, what? Trevor was arrested. And in the February of 1972, he was put in prison. He was sentenced to 5 years for wounding with intent. This did not best please Trevor. Trevor was so angered that he had been put in prison for this. I definitely think, I mean, where the hell has that piece of skull gone in his brain? But yeah, really pissed off. Like, what the hell? So angry. He was just so angry, furious at the fact that this was the outcome of his actions. A lot of rage, a lot of anger. And so when he was in prison, he plotted the demise of poor old Stanley. He was like, I'm going to finish him off. Also, while he was in prison, he had himself a pen pal, and this it's weird. I don't know how it began or any of that information, but it was with a 14-year-old girl who was a local. So I think they knew each other before he got put into prison. She was called Beverly Driver. My apologies that I don't know more about the circumstances behind the pen pal situation. But the long and the short of it is that he wanted to have a relationship with her. Oh, okay. She's 14 years old. Okay. And he really liked her. She did not feel the same way. In their writings to each other, this sort of came out that she wasn't reciprocating his feelings and that a relationship would not be on the cards. And this just added to his anger and his rage. And then poor Beverly, she was added to his list. He was like, well, okay, she's got to go too. After serving about half of his sentence, about 2.5 years, he was released from prison, and it just immediately he set off on his mission to murder Stanley. Like, he was not wasting any time. He was on a mission. He wanted him dead. Very sadly for Stanley, excuse me, itchy nose, he had passed away. So while Trevor was in prison, Stanley had died. I don't know if he died from his injuries. I couldn't find any information on that. I couldn't find out whether Stanley had died from what had happened to him at the pub or whether it was something else, you know, like had he had a heart attack or something. I couldn't find that information out. If anyone knows, give me a shout, let me know in the comments. Because when Trevor went into prison, Stanley was alive. So he didn't die like a week later from being hit over the head, I don't believe, because I'm sure that would have been a different story, wouldn't it? So yeah, but he died during the time that Trevor was in prison. And this really, really pissed Trevor off. He was so angry because he wanted to be the one that finished him off. I mean, he's just come out. He obviously had no care about going back into prison, because it just seemed like he was just going to head there, kill Stanley, and obviously like probably go back to prison. So he must not have really cared about that. I don't know, wasn't in his brain, but it feels like that was the case. There was no like, oh, I shouldn't, because, you know, I'll just go back to prison. He didn't seem to, that wasn't something that was going on in there. I don't think much was going on in there, to be honest. With a huge amount of rage and anger, he already had a large amount of rage and anger when he came out of prison and was trying to find Stanley, but that was just amplified when he found out that Stanley had already died. And that was all just built up and pent up, and he went out looking for poor Beverly. On New Year's Eve 1974, he rolls up at Beverly's house. Thankfully, she is not at home, but this blows my mind. What's going on in the 70s? Because he finds an axe and he lobs it at her lounge window. Why has everyone got axes? Is it like firewood? I don't know, but why is there like loads of axes just laying around? Like, that was a question I had. Another axe in this story. Like, okay. Jeez. He didn't find her at home, so he goes off wandering about. He's drinking heavily. Lots of drinking going on. He's got a knife. He's armed himself. Oh, and he's just wandering about trying to find her. Really horribly, and such awful timing for this poor girl, he comes across a young girl, and it is not Beverly. She is 15-year-old Janet Stewart. She was on her way to a New Year's Eve party. Just so sad. Trevor approached her, he attacked her, and he stabbed her in the neck. He then took her body, she died, he then took her body to a local clay pit and buried her in a shallow grave. Later that night, when Janet didn't return from the party, her parents reported her missing. An investigation was launched, and it was discovered that she'd never even got to the party. So the police then launched a public appeal for any information if anybody had seen Janet that evening. It was thought that it was very unlikely that she'd run away. She was happy, and there wasn't anything to suggest that would have been the case. So really quickly with this case, there was just no leads, nothing came up, nobody had seen anything, and it's like she'd just vanished into thin air, and the case very quickly became a cold case. The only person that knew what had really happened to Janet was Trevor, and I don't know if this is just brazen or I don't know, but he would return he'd buried her in a shallow grave, and he would return to that grave often. And over time, he would remove parts of her body with, you've guessed it, another axe. So arms, limbs, things like that. And then eventually he would decapitate her body. And it's thought that was because she would not be then easy to identify if they did come across her remains. But yeah, it just feels like ritualistic a bit, doesn't it, that he would return to her body so many times, and every time he returns it's obviously a risk that he would be caught, but he did do it a few times, so and he did keep a trophy. Yeah, he did. He kept some jewellery from Janet's body. He took it from her, and less than a year later, after her murder, he met a woman called Sheila Farrow, and they started up a very weird relationship, very odd relationship actually, and he would then he'd go on to gift this jewellery from Janet to Sheila. Ooh, just weird to think that he got off on her wearing the jewellery of this young girl that he'd murdered. Sicko. Sheila and Trevor, they moved in together. The reason I say it's weird is because it was a bit like, sorry if I'm a bit handsy today. I'm feeling spicy because I passed my driving test. Sorry, not sorry. I smashed it. So, what? Weird, yeah. So they were a bit weird because he would sort of describe their relationship as, like, he saw Sheila as a sort of mother figure. But then they had a sexual romantic relationship. So, okay. That's a little odd. Isn't it? Is it? I think that's odd. They moved about quite a lot. They went from place to place to place, and they ended up at one point in Moston. Sorry, somewhere in Manchester. Moston or Morston. I can't work it out how to say it. And this is where Trevor would claim his second victim on the 20th of July in 1975. This victim was Wanda Scala. She was 18 years old and she worked as a barmaid in the Lightbone Hotel. She finished a late shift that night. She played some pool and hung about for a little while, and then she started to walk home at around midnight. And this is when Trevor found her. No knife this time, didn't have a knife. So he repeatedly hit Wanda over the head with a brick, and also strangled Wanda, and I think he sexually assaulted her but I'm not clear on that, so take that with a pinch of salt. But definitely he hit her a lot of times with the brick and strangled her. Grimness coming up, so if you do not want to hear, I will put a time at the bottom when to skip forward to, because it is grim, okay? It's just, and it makes me cringe. Okay, so here we go. He then mutilated Wanda's body. So once she had died, he then bit off her right nipple. That literally makes me feel funny, and it makes me hurt in my own physical body. That's grim. He did that, and then he used the brick over and over and over again and just mutilated her face. Basically, she was unrecognisable, and it just shattered her skull, and just a lot of rage. That's a huge amount of rage, just awful. And he then took her eyeballs out, and I don't know how, but he embedded them into her abdomen. I don't know how, and I need to move on because it's just grim and gross. He then took Wanda's body to a local building site, and again, as he had done previously, he buried her in a shallow grave. Not very well. Wanda was actually found the next morning. People that had walked past could see her legs, and I think he'd just there was a shallow grave, and he'd put some leaves and bricks and things over the top, but they could see her legs. Police were called, they arrived, they removed cardboard as well. I think he covered her with cardboard. So they removed the bricks and the stones and the cardboard, and they found her body. That's horrific. That must stay with you forever, because that must have been a grim discovery. It was determined that this was Wanda, and again the police released an appeal for witnesses to come forward had anybody seen anything. The police also issued in their appeal. Sorry, I'm just, there's too much excitement and adrenaline through my veins. The police also, when they issued their appeal for witnesses, they also said for the public to keep an eye out. Sorry, I worried myself then. I thought I'd deleted all of my notes. They also asked the public to look out for some belongings. So Wanda's handbag was missing, and one of her shoes. That's just bizarre, but one of her shoes was missing. And we know that he likes a trophy. So they thought all they could think was that the person that had committed the crime had taken these things with them. Get this though, a few days later, the cheeky he returned the shoe to the crime scene. Can you believe that? That he's brazen. He is brazen. That's it. He's just taunting the police. Put the shoe back. He's infuriating, isn't he? This story was all over the press, as you can imagine. This young girl and this horrific crime that's been committed. It's really sad. Lots of appeals going on all over the press. Everywhere you look. News, newspapers, you name it. One night, Trevor and his younger brother Colin, they were at the pub together, so they were having a drink at the pub. Colin was getting really peed off. He was getting really peed off because all that Trevor could talk about, all that he was yakking on about was this case, this Wanda girl that's been murdered, to the point that Colin was like, what the hell, why do you keep going on about this? Okay, and also it's a really sad story, isn't it? Some people when they yak on about sad things, I promise you I don't do that to my friends. Well, some of them I do with you. But yeah, so he was yakking on, and it wasn't well reciprocated. Colin was just like, can we just stop talking about this? It's just depressing me. Stop it. And Trevor, he explained himself. He said to Colin, well, the reason I'm talking about it is because I did it. Ooh. And he was almost proud. So he sort of boasted to Colin about it. He was like, wow, I did it, didn't I? It came across in that way, a boastful manner. Bit of skull floating around. So this terrified Colin. And I think from what I could gather that Colin wanted to get out of there. Colin wanted to run for the hills. And he believed his brother. He believed him 100%. He was like, oh God, You know, and that's traumatic, isn't it? Like, your brother's just told you he's just done this, he's just murdered this girl in this horrific way, and he's a scary person. Gosh, and you're sitting there, no. So Colin knew that if he'd have got up and left or whatever, made a fuss, that Trevor would have just, well, Colin wouldn't have probably made it out of that pub alive, or very far. He just thought he would be the next Wanda. So he stayed at the pub, and he just held himself together until it was time to leave. And when he left, it must have been quite obvious to Trevor that he had made a mistake by telling Colin, because he obviously saw that he was wobbled by it and that it was a bad move to tell his brother that what he'd done. They then went back to Colin's flat, and Trevor proceeded to beat Colin so badly that he beat him unconscious, and in front of Colin's girlfriend as well. So they went back to the flat, Colin's girlfriend was there, and then Trevor just went hell for leather and just beat him severely. When he'd finished beating the living daylights out of Colin, he turned to his girlfriend, Colin's girlfriend, and said, "Will you make us some beans on toast?" Bit of comfort food after he's just beaten the shite out of his brother. I mean, you can't, what the hell? This one is bizarre. Too much. Can you see why I'm like, how the hell did this get overshadowed? I mean, I know Peter Sutcliffe was whoa, but geez. Poor girl made him beans on toast, as you would. Probably absolutely terrified. I would have forgotten to butter the toast or something. Do you know what I mean? Oh God, you'd be so scared. Eats his beans on toast and then he leaves. What happens next does shock me, because I think it was brave. And I think if you were that scared of someone and you really know what they're capable of, yeah, I think it's very brave. But Colin and his girlfriend, the next morning, they went to the police. They went to the police and they reported Colin's assault. So they reported Trevor. And Colin also told the police that Trevor had confessed to the murder of Wanda. And maybe he found that bravery because he thought, well, if like he's murdered someone. So he's going to go to prison for forever, probably. So that maybe is why he went to the police. But there would be a part of you that just thought, I really freaking hope that this pays off, because I'm dead otherwise. I mean, he basically nearly killed him anyway. Oh, it's just, yeah. I do think that was brave. Or, I don't know. I mean, it was the right thing to do. Trevor was then arrested. So he was arrested, and the police really did think that there was something in this. They knew of... Fuck. Hello? I am flushed, I am flushed. Oh, that's lush. Think of this. The police really thought there was something in this because they knew of Trevor and his previous convictions and his violent tendencies and behaviour, beating someone around the head with an axe, you know? So they were like, there could be something in this, definitely. He could be the sort of person that would commit this sort of crime. So they were really keen to get evidence on Trevor. They also managed to get a saliva sample from the bite on Wanda's body. So they had gathered enough for a sample there. This was 1975. So forensic science like that was in its infancy and a bit, oh God, really frustrating, isn't it? But they could only determine, when they took a sample of Trevor's saliva, they could only determine that he was of the same blood group to the killer. They couldn't make a conclusive match. How annoying. Trevor, there was something going on there, because he worked out that his bite impression, they've obviously taken the saliva sample and he's thinking, oh God, yeah, I bit her. So he realised that his teeth, if they took an impression of his teeth, that would give him away, and it would just be like, boom, strong evidence against the guy. So he managed to get a nail file, right, oh my God, into prison. I smuggled in, I think it was Sheila Farrow, his girlfriend. I think it was her. Might be wrong though. And he got it smuggled in and he filed all of his teeth down. That's grim. That just, doesn't that make you want to like, it's horrible. He filed all of his teeth so that there was they wouldn't match. There would be no match. I hope it hurt though. Also, is that what an innocent man would do? Dickwad. They still took the impression, and yes, it did not match, so there you go. They also then spoke to Sheila Farrow, his girlfriend, and she gave him an alibi, of course she did, for the night of Wanda's murder. So this is not looking good, and I'm scared for Colin. Literally, as I'm researching this, I'm thinking, oh my God, Colin, what is going to happen? He needs to go to Bermuda or something because he's dead. He was released because there was no evidence. There was no hard evidence. Just that his brother Colin could have just not liked his brother that day and just gone, oh yeah, by the way, he said that he killed her. You know, so there was no hard evidence against Trevor. He got released. Colin must have had the sweatiest bum in the world. Do you know what I mean? What? He got community service for the... What happened to Trevor? What happened to Colin? For the assault on Colin. 5th of March 1976, he assaults a woman in a pub toilet. So he makes some sexual advances, thinks that obviously there's something to it or something there, and she rebuffs those advances and shuts him down, and he did not take kindly to that whatsoever. He began strangling this poor woman, and properly, not just to scare her or anything like that. And they really believed that he was intending to kill her, but he was interrupted. She was fighting for her life. She had some injury. She'd bitten part of her own tongue off. So he really was going for it. He was trying to kill her. That is what is believed to have happened there. He intended to kill her. When he was interrupted, he just ran off. He pegged it. The lady in the pub toilet and the witnesses in the pub, they all gave a description of Trevor, but really frustratingly, really sadly, obviously they didn't know his name. All of those puzzle pieces were not put together in time, and Trevor then committed his third and final murder. This was 17-year-old Sharon Mossov. Apologies if I'm saying that incorrectly. On the 9th of March, Sharon went to an office party in Bolton, and then she got on a bus and she travelled home. And it was when she got off of the bus in her hometown that it all just went disastrously wrong. She actually spotted Trevor. He was trying to, weirdly, I think this was her place of work, like where she worked, and she happened to see him trying to break into the place of work, the office, with a screwdriver, and she called over and she told him not to, and he stabbed Sharon with the screwdriver. He beat her over the head, and he ended up strangling Sharon with her own tights. He then mutilated Sharon's body in the same way that he had done with Wanda, and he bit off her nipple, and then he threw her body down into the canal. But the oaf suddenly remembered that he nearly got caught last time from the bite mark on Wanda's body. So he was like, oh my God. So he had to go back into the canal and get her body, retrieve her body, and then he scratched over the bite mark that he'd left with a rivet on one of his items of clothing. I think they're like on jeans or jackets, aren't they? Like the rivet bit. He scratched over it 64 times to hide the evidence. Sharon's body was found the next morning, basically almost frozen because the water was so cold. Again, I hope he had frostbite or something from having to go back into the canal. So she was very frozen. She still had her tights around her neck, but she was naked apart from that, and they found the rest of her clothes scattered around and in the canal. At this point, the police did connect Wanda and Sharon's murders. They had so many similarities, young girls on their own, late at night, and the injury to their nipple, the bite. So they tied those cases together at this point. They also, at this point, had identified that Trevor was the attacker from the pub bathroom. And they also, remember, he was a suspect in Wanda's murder because Colin had come forwards and said, oh, he confessed. So he had been a suspect for Wanda's murder already. He was number one suspect, and they really had a feeling about him. And now they also had this other attack that had happened in the pub, and they were just kind of really sure that he was definitely capable and that he was spiralling and that he was the person that had committed these two murders. They wanted to arrest Trevor again and just have another shot. They wanted to have another go at finding evidence to prove that he was the perpetrator. But Trevor was on the run. He was off. And they launched a big manhunt, and it wasn't fruitful. It wasn't very good. So everything was falling apart here in this case. And then they got an anonymous tip from the public. Somebody came forward to say that Sheila Farrow, so Trevor's girlfriend, she had been signing on for benefits at a job centre in Fellsworth. The police found her. They put her under surveillance, and they were following her and looking at her every move. And eventually they followed her back to a flat, a building, and they were so sure. They were like, he's got to be with her. So they were sure of it. This flat was on Wellington Road in Stockport in Manchester. We're now in April 1976. The police surround this building, this flat block of flats. They surround it because they are like, oh, he's probably with her. Okay, so they surround it because he's dangerous. Don't forget. And then they enter. They go in and they knock on the door and they're like, come in, Sheila. Can we talk to you? She's like, yeah, okay. So she lets them in. They search around. He's not there. They can't find him. But they talk to Sheila and they want to know, like, you know, they give her a bit of a grilling, basically. She's their closest link to Trevor. So they want to find where he's at and they think that she knows. They're asking her all these questions and she's answering away and she's being really cool, really calm, blah, blah, blah. Nim, 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 nim. I don't know where he is. And she's pointing like this, like a crazy fool, up at the loft, at the ceiling. Ooh, I got so excited I nearly drowned on my own spittle. So she's going like this and they're like, oh my God. And there's a loft hatch, like a small loft hatch, because they're in the top floor flat. Itchy eyebrows all going on. So they're like, oh my God, he's up there. Long and short of it is they poke their head up, which I would not want to be that officer. Can you imagine? He'd just be there like with an axe, probably. God's sake. So they shout up and he's like, oh, I will come down if you promise not to hit me. All of the violence that he goes around and he's like scared of getting a wallop from the police. Come on. So he does come down, he is arrested and he is taken in. With Trevor in custody, Sheila feels safe and she feels like she can actually tell her truth now. And she just says that the alibi that she gave for the night of Wanda's murder, also the night of Sharon's murder, you know, he wasn't with her, so he has no alibi. It was all made up. She was just petrified. She had to say that, otherwise he would have killed her, and she was very frightened of him. With no alibi, but also with not much evidence, but with no alibi, he was then charged with the murder of Wanda and Sharon, and he pleaded not guilty. But then, in August of 1976, he decided to make a confession. So he changed his mind, and he was like, I'm going to confess. But he didn't just confess to the murder of Wanda and Sharon, he also confessed to the 1974 murder of Janet Stewart. And the police were like, what? Why? Like, he's not even under investigation for this. And they looked into it and, yeah, I mean, he made a full confession that he had murdered the three girls. Janet's murder at this point had been unsolved for 2 years. So like I said, it was a cold case. Really frustrating when that happens, isn't it? And really awful for the family. So they were like, well, you know, kind of, you need to prove that you did do this. So he told the police that he would take them to Janet's body. And he did. Even though he had removed her parts of her body and decapitated her and spread those parts around, the police did manage to find most of Janet's remains. His trial was then in April of 1977, and he then decided that he was going to plead not guilty. Okie dokes. So he did that. A few days later, he then changed his mind again, and he decided that he would confess, but to a lesser charge of manslaughter because he was insane. So that was what he wanted to do. So just back and forth here, isn't it? Like, make your mind up. The court were like, no, we're not having that. We don't think you're insane. No. And then Trevor fired all of his legal representation, as they do. Just thought he'd have a go at that for himself. 3 psychiatrists came in and said that he was fit to stand trial and he was not mentally ill, and therefore he wouldn't qualify for the manslaughter plea. I'm conflicted with that, because he had that brain injury and they said like a slither of brain sort of went in and embedded in the brain. So in my head, a little bit of me is like, well, that like he was brain damaged, wasn't he? But then they know more than me. Maybe like their point was, well, I don't know. It's not an excuse, but they kind of did say that he had brain damage. Do you know what I mean? Confusion. On the 2nd of May 1977, he was found guilty on all 3 counts of murder. Trevor was given 3 consecutive life sentences and an extra 5 years as well for the attack of the woman in the pub toilet. So that's forever. But after 30 years in prison, Trevor tried to, sorry if I'm a bit rosy by the way, it's a mixture of the gin and excitement, adrenaline and lighting and, I don't know, just face hotness. I digress. What happened? I'm too spicy for this today, really. You know. What happened, Sophie? Oh, yeah, 30 years in prison he's been, right? Long old time. Long old slog. He's been in prison, in the slammer, I was going to say. What? Okay, Sophie, chill. He's been in prison for 30 years and he decides to appeal his conviction, probably thinking, right, I've served 30 years, I've been a good boy. I don't know if he had been, but maybe he had, and maybe I can try and get out. You know, 30 years is a long time. Right, tried to do that. It totally backfired because the judge was like, do you know what, actually, sir? You are such a terrible human being that I actually think you should have a whole life tariff. So that backfired, didn't it? He's in there like trying to get an appeal and get released and they're like, you're an evil one. No. A whole life tariff would mean that you can't appeal, nothing goes on like that, blah blah blah, you die in prison, that is your fate. On the 23rd of September in 2012, when he was 67 years old, he suffered a very big heart attack in Wakefield Prison, which is where he was, and then he was taken to hospital and he died 2 days later. Just for reference, because I found this interesting because I wanted to know. So Trevor Hardy's first murder was New Year's Eve of 1974, and he was arrested in August of 1976. And Peter Sutcliffe's first murder was in 1975. He wasn't arrested until 1981. So although he was arrested much later, 5 years later than Trevor Hardy, all of those murders that were gripping the nation in the press and everything, we were all, well, I don't remember, people were just like, oh my God, what's going on? All of these women are being murdered. That was the media frenzy. So even though they hadn't arrested Sutcliffe and they didn't know who was responsible until 1981, these murders were big news. And that is why Hardy went under the radar, Trevor, because like he'd been arrested and everything, but all of these murders of these women were still taking place. So that is where the focus of media attention was. On the Yorkshire Ripper. That is all I have for you today on that case. I found it an interesting one because I hadn't heard about it before and he was just vile, and it's just, yeah. I am now going to finish my gin, put my feet up, have a bath, I think, have some food, relax, close my eyes. My eyes have just done so much looking, hazards, mirrors, signal, manoeuvre. For like 5 days freaking straight. I did an intensive course, so I swear to God last night I was just dreaming about roundabouts. All worth it though. The thought that I can go out in my car tomorrow on my own, it's like I've got proper imposter syndrome. Like, what? And where do I go? What am I going to do? don't know. I'm going to go and have a little drive. Should I get a coffee? Oh, my eye did a twitchy thing. Honestly, it's been such a week. I'm so drained. I'm so high. It's like such a week. I'm like drained to the max, really tired, but so like excited and elated and it's just such a weird mix. It's called manic, I believe. Manic. Anyway, where's my gin? Thank you so much for joining me today. Even the ice has melted, so it must be warm in here. I think it's me. I'm like a human radiator. It's all the excitement. That's what it is. Oh, God. I really did miss you last week, by the way. I really did. I just felt like I missed the shed. I missed coming up and just sitting up here for a bit and having a chat with you. And I missed just uploading the video on Friday as well, because there was nothing to like chat about and in the comments and things like that. So that was sad. But yeah. And I got like a cold. So that's what happens when you slow down, isn't it? You just get ill. Anyway, I better go because I do feel like I might need to like go and run around the garden. Burn some energy. Definitely can't go out for a drive now. Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Sin and Tonic. I hope you can join me next week for another episode. What? For another true crime story and a glass or a jar or a vase or a mug or a flask or a bottle of gin. I love you. I will never leave you again. Bye.